Greetings, colleagues. Welcome to the Ivory Attic. I'm Ian Escherwood.
And I'm Kurt Andreessen.
And we are here, but not here. What's going on?
I know,
with
where
time
are we?
Mr. Physics.
I know, yeah, exactly. We're halfway in between, so we're probably in the middle of the Atlantic.
We're in the middle of the
Yeah,
Atlantic doing an Ivory Attic episode. No, so you are back in our central location.
I'm in Gettysburg.
You're in Gettysburg, but you're not in the attic.
No. I can't get in because you're not there, and breaking in is difficult.
So just for context, this is not an inside joke. So I'm in the United Kingdom for the semester, and Kurt is back holding down the fort in Gettysburg, and we are doing our first Ivory Attic episode abroad.
Oh boy.
Space and time in the big ocean, and I am up here at Royal Holloway University, where I'm giving a talk later this evening, and I'm here with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Tooth Murphy. Hi, Amy.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh,
Great.
Hi, Amy.
Well, Amy and I have known each other for a long time, since 2008. And in fact, Amy was probably my first, and for a while, my only friend in graduate school. And almost became my only friend in graduate school, I think. And it certainly is one that I keep talking to now, or else I'm here, right? But Amy did her PhD at the University of Glasgow, where I did my PhD, in English, in English literature, right?
Yes.
But Amy is a faculty member in the history department at Royal Holloway.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, very cool. She is senior lecturer in oral history and postgraduate research lead. I want to talk about that second one. Sounds really interesting, because
it sounds more interesting than it is.
Well, it shows that when you put senior lecturer in front of your name, or when you become associate professor, that all of a sudden you get sucked into more administrative work.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something we've not talked about, I think, enough on our podcast. So welcome, Amy.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. And welcome to Royal Holloway, University of London.
Yeah, it is lovely. Kurt, you'd love this campus. They have like a huge grand building in the middle.
Oh, man, I do love that. Hey, before we go on, just because I feel like we haven't gotten to talk to this before, can we just briefly? So senior lecturer, there are all these different terms. I feel like they obviously mean something once you jump across the Atlantic. So
we do have a different system. So you would go in once you get your first contract, like a research and teaching contract. So I'm on a research and teaching contract. You go in at lecturer level.
Oh, okay.
You step up the ladder would be senior lecturer. Then after that, now it depends where you are, because if you're in some institutions, as we are here, you then would become a reader.
Oh, okay.
And that is your final step before becoming a professor.
Oh, okay.
Now, my partner's reader sounds crappy and does not sound as impressive as senior.
Yeah, I like the idea of reader.
Like, I'm just reading.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like that the pinnacle of like you've made it. Now you don't have to do anything anymore. You can just read. Like I feel like that's what it's saying, right? Like now you can just read.
Yeah, and I don't really know. To be honest, I don't know where that sort of lineage comes from, but more and more universities are dropping the reader thing now and just going from senior lecturer straight to professor. But I love that Royal Holloway have kept that hurdle in for me.
Yeah, there you go.
So that we all still have to go to reach the professoriate. But
yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect.
But it's fair to say, I know in your podcast before, you've talked about like the adjunct situation in the States, and we don't have such an issue with adjuncts doing so much of the teaching, but it is still the case that you will have a lot of people who are on hourly paid contracts who won't be at lecturer level. They'll be called something like teaching fellow.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, good. That clarifies it all.
And roughly senior lecturers kind of equivalent, I think, Amy, right, to our associate professor.
I would say yes.
Like associate professor. Okay, excellent. Well, good. Well, now I know something about a position I will never have. That's good.
Kurt's always been very kind with me because he's actually a full professor. And he rarely ever pulls rank with that. He does occasionally.
I really should start doing it more because eventually you're going to get it and then I can't do it anymore. So I really should take advantage of it now. So,
Amy, tell us about yourself, like where you grew up, where you're from, what got you into this weird line of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I grew up in a very rural part of Scotland, a place called near a place called Lanark, which has a very rich history itself. We won't talk about William Wallace, but many people do when you mention Lanark. Many Americans do, in fact.
Well, he's one of our national heroes.
Right. I grew up in a small place near Lanark, and it's, if you know anything about Scotland, if you imagine where Glasgow is on the west coast, Edinburgh on the east coast, and drew a triangle down, you would find Lanark. So we're kind of in between the central belt and the borders of Scotland. I actually, when I went to uni, I didn't begin in the humanities. I actually went to university to study law, and I lasted 6 months. Because I did not like it, and I don't think it liked me either. And I think it is a result of having two parents who didn't go to university. I was the first in my family to go to university, and lots of well-meaning people giving my parents advice about what you should do when you're a good student. So go and do something that has an obvious job at the end, law or medicine. And I'm very squeamish, so law it is. Lasted 6 months, not for me, no. And changed programs, thank goodness, to English and history. So my undergrad's in English and history. Then my master's is in English, and then my PhD is in English. But I am now, for as long as they'll let me, masquerading as a historian.
You're interdisciplinary.
I am. I am that thing.
You're that thing, and you're between two disciplines in the humanities, which means you're a humanist too.
That's true, yeah. Right? Yeah, and I've been based in an English department too. I was in the English department at Roehampton University.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So what drew you to oral history?
So what brought me to oral history? Well, I didn't know what it was for most of I think all of my undergraduate. I didn't know anything about that. And it's funny how these things, you rely on these kind of moments where something happens where, you get put onto a different track. And had that not happened, you don't know where you would maybe end up. So it was actually down to a professor of mine when I was doing my master's, my MLit at Glasgow. He was teaching us Irish literature, contemporary Irish literature. And he said to me, he'd asked us to do some exercise with the stuff we were reading for that day. And he said to me after, when I said, I'm thinking about my PhD, I don't know what to do it about. I knew I wanted to do something to do with queer, something or other, something lesbian, something lesbian. And he said, okay, well, have you thought about oral history? I said, I literally don't even know what it is. And he said, well, it's sitting down and talking to people and finding out about the past through, sort of lived experience. And the reason I think you should look at that is because you have a really good ear for nuance that most people don't have. Big picture you're not so good at, and you really need to start thinking about that and paying attention. But the nuance you can do. And I think that you could take that to the study of oral history. So applying sort of literary analysis techniques on oral history testimony. And this was like I owe that guy so much. His name was Paddy Lyons, a really campy, fantastic lecturer of the old school. And I owe him like my entire kind of, that's just what happened. I went to see Lynn Abrams, who was my supervisor, big head honcho, oral historian, and I went from there. But if I hadn't, if he hadn't just sometimes you need someone to see something in you that you don't even know is there.
Yeah. And it's amazing to realize how just one of those, what you would see just as a blip conversation with somebody can actually change the course of your career.
For sure, like 100%.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to stick on in academia, but my PhD would have probably stuck in literature.
Right.
And to be honest, I don't know how that would have panned out, because I think we've spoken about this before, Ian. When I started to sort of move myself over more conceptually, I guess, into history and literally, because they gave us offices. Mm-hmm. So that was also
yeah, that's right.
But when I had been in English literature, I always considered myself something like theory light, like diet theory kind of thing. But when I moved over into history, people started asking me about theory.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's because historians don't do much of it.
Right.
And so we always thought you were super theory heavy. Like I would ask you lots of theory questions because I was theory weak, even though I think I was okay for a historian.
Yeah.
But it was one of it's one of those things. It's such a different way of looking at the text that you're working with, right?
The context is so different. And so just, I hadn't changed, but everybody's perception of me was different.
Because theory is the thing in history that you have to get through to be able to go into the archive. Right.
But what I love about oral history is that it's theory applied.
Yeah.
Because I still don't have much patience for theory when I can't see any result, any outcome from that. Whereas oral history is such a theoretically rigorous discipline, although it doesn't always seem like that from the outside. It really is. But I can see it in action. And for me, that's the sweet spot. Like, that's one of the things I really continue to be fascinated by, is that I see that. I read something, I understand a theoretical concept, and then I literally see it borne out when I sit down with somebody. And so I'm part of that in action too, because it's this conversation that we're having, which exemplifies the theory.
No, interesting.
Right.
I thought you were going to say I thought you said you were going to do oral history just because you didn't like reading. I thought that was going to be that.
Oh, that is.
It's just easier to listen to people, like audiobooks, right? You're like picking audiobooks, right? You're like
so it's funny because I was having a conversation with somebody last night about the oral histories that are at the Imperial War Museum. And they have a whole bunch of oral histories. A lot of them were done in the 1960s with veterans who were in their 60s, 70s, some of them early 80s, right? It's been a long time since they were in the war, and so they're older, so their memories aren't necessarily great. But I was talking to the person, and the person was like, yeah, they have a lot of good archival stuff, but man, their oral histories are great. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, because they're fun to listen to.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you're listening to conversations with people, right? If you're going through documents, it's not that fun. In particular, if you have like a mold allergy, right? It's but listening to people just chat about stuff is a little bit different. But at the same time, it's an incredibly different way of actually looking at source materials.
It is.
And it's methodologically incredibly fraught.
It is. That is also true. I think, what's also important to mention is that you have to like people.
Oh, right.
Ian's out. So
I realized a lot of historians just checked out at that point.
Right.
But you have to be on the social end of the historian spectrum, right? Like, oral history conferences are fun because there are people who like talking and listening. And
that second part, I think I think we've lost a lot of people with that second part.
Yes. You have to also listen. That's it. I mean, oral history is an interest. I mean, I was talking to students about this earlier on. I find it just an endlessly, not just fascinating, but it's such a privilege to sit down with people and have this long stretch of time carved out to just sit and really ask them to be expansive about their life and their ideas and their reflections. Like, it's so contrary to so many of the ways in which we engage with people. And one of the challenges to work with students is to get them to not rush to answer things all the time, like to really sit back and listen. Because most of the time when we're having a conversation, we're not doing that. We're waiting for our next chance to speak. So it's a wholly different practice. Like, you have to, in a way, you have to subsume yourself. You have to really pull yourself in and make sure that you foreground that other person. It should be like about 90% them and 10% you. And all that you should be responding and facilitating them. So I think it's a really important practice, actually, in a world where we don't spend that much time really doing in-depth listening. And I noticed that with students. They get frustrated. They get, as an embodied experience, listening to an interview, they find difficult. They get agitated. They are not used to sitting listening deeply,
right,
without trying to do something else, right? Like, probably people listen to podcasts, you're doing something else. You can't do that when you're listening to an oral history, and especially you can't do it when you're interviewing somebody. That's rude. But you're
checking your phone while they're talking about their trauma.
These are good tips for us for the next podcast. So don't check our phones while we're talking to people. Like, I tell you, really can learn some stuff here.
But it's also exhausting. Like, it's really tiring. And I've told students that too. Like, when they conduct an interview, they'll be like, I'm so tired. I said, I know, I told you were going to be tired, but you didn't believe me, did you? Because it's just listening. How tiring is that?
So I'm really curious. Once you have this data, so like once you have these like oral histories, like what do you do with it afterwards? What does it look like on the back end?
I mean, that's actually been one of the great questions of oral history, that in a way it was kind of described a couple of decades ago now as the sort of deep, dark secret of oral history, in that we just continue to collect more and more and more and more, because everybody wants to do the fun bit, which is the interviewing.
Right.
Right, like that's the fun bit, but the risk is that we just keep on collecting, and then it just sits there. We don't do anything with it. So actually making it accessible and making it usable is part of our sort of ethical responsibility in a way. You have someone's story recorded, and you owe it to them to give that the respect that it deserves by making it accessible and usable to people.
Right.
But what do you do with it? There's a whole range of different approaches that people have taken, and for me, coming from the literary side of things, it really is bringing that literary analysis techniques to the interview. So I'll be looking for themes, motifs, and the way in which people particularly way in which people construct meaning through narrating their life story. So I always say to students, if you're interested in facts, you're in the wrong place. We're not doing that here. Oral history is not the place to get at facts per se. There are other historical methods which are more useful. And in a way, we're actually not interested in facts. So oral history began as a very, I suppose, a self-defensive discipline, because it was getting a lot of attacks that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, it's fallible, memory, people forget stuff, people make themselves sound good or whatever. And it wasn't until it actually claimed in the 1970s and 1980s that it claimed those things as strengths of the discipline, or something particular that we were trying to do. I say we, I'm not that old, but I am now. That actually what we're interested in is the meaning that people make out of the things that have happened to them, and how people marshal their memories to construct a life narrative that they can live with, that they can be at ease with. We call that composure. They become composed psychically, kind of, that sense of being at peace. Yeah. And also that they're composing a story which is intelligible to a listening audience. So how do we make ourselves legible to others in the world? So it's really about that process of narrative. And so I'm looking for, how does this person make sense of the things that have happened to them? Why have they chosen to mention these things of all the thousands upon thousands of things they could have said when I asked them a set of questions? Why did they choose these things? So it's trying to dig into that. And then, of course, trying to build a picture that allows us to gain some kind of deeper understanding of that historical moment or event. So my work in queer history, a lot of archives just historically have not been interested to document queer experience, or if they have, it's been from top-down perspective of medical or scientific or criminal justice system, so top-down discourses, and we don't have the voices of individuals. So for a lot of oral historians, the reason they get into it is because they're interested in minoritized experience, and it's a way to sort of redress to some small extent those imbalances and inequalities in the archive by bringing a history from below approach, which can, give voice to some of these experiences.
That's really interesting. So what is your current project? What are you working on right now?
My project at the moment, which I've been working on for a while, but that's it becomes, at some point it becomes embarrassing. So how is that project?
Yeah,
there was a pandemic though.
Absolutely.
I have for a while now been working on a project looking at the lived experience of butch and queer female masculinity. So the project looks at, if we think about the butch lesbian, my take on this is that if I ask you to imagine, if I say close your eyes and imagine a butch, you have an idea that comes into your mind. We see it as a very visible, aesthetically driven kind of, a very visual birth identity. But actually, there's a real lack of historiography on what it has meant to be butch across from around about the 1950s when that identity emerges. So there's a real lack of analysis that goes beyond the purely visual symbolism of the butch and looks at what butch interiority might be like and how that might be experienced. So the project, I've done just over 50 interviews in the States and in the UK, sitting down with butches and former butches, people who are now trans guys who at one point identified as butch, to just try to tease out how does that outside experience represent a felt internal experience. So butch interiority and things, going through a range of different themes and topics like work life, relationships, love and sex, sexuality, gender, embodiment, what is it to be butch out in public space? So what is it to be, and I should say that this project is particularly looking at what we call AFAB, so assigned female at birth.
Okay.
So people who were assigned female at birth and who then experienced themselves in a masculinized way. Okay. So it's looking at what does it mean to have been assigned female at birth and then to move through the world in a masculine way, which is at odds with how society expects you as an embodied person to behave.
Right. Oh, interesting. And did having only grown up in the U.S., is it a very common experience between the U.S. and the U.K., or are there pretty strong differences there?
One of the things that I was doing with this project was trying to explore that transatlantic connection, because I think a lot of the work that's been done on butch, and I should say, so butch and femme both emerged from the bar scene of like the post-war period in the States and in the UK around about the same time. They're kind of coterminous. The States is just a little bit ahead, and then we see it start to emerge in the UK on a much smaller scale, of course, based in London, whereas in the States it's popping up in some of the main cities. And it emerges as a kind of a subcultural scene of butch and femme identities. And it really is the first kind of nascent lesbian community that we can understand as kind of coming together in a physical space. Okay. So it comes from around about the 1950s. And the differences have always been assumed to be a result of America just being such obviously America's bigger than the UK, but having these kind of huge metropolitan areas like New York and San Francisco, which can house and contain these huge queer cultures and communities. Yeah. So I think the difference has been a matter of scale.
Oh, okay.
But of course, there was cross-fertilization, cross-pollination. So the project is also, I've interviewed a couple of people who, for example, are from the States, but who spent a good chunk of time in the 90s in London. And so a lot of people are going backwards and forwards. Often, relationships would form. People would be going backwards and forwards to the UK, the US. And so some of the project is also trying to tease that out. When the project was first conceptualized, I wanted to make it almost like a triangle, like an Anglo triangle with Australia as well, but the pandemic hit and I had funding to go, and it was obviously not gonna. That was when Australia was like, nobody is coming in here ever.
Right.
So unfortunately, I dropped that, which would have been a shame, because there's some really good work looking at comparing Britain and Australia, and so that was the reason to bring Australia in, because I wanted to make that triangulation between the three. But hey ho, another project, another time.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think the project's big enough already.
It's big enough,
right? So it's crazy to think about that this is an under-researched area within your field.
Right. And I actually, so some good respected colleagues and friends, someone like Rebecca Jennings, who's really pioneered lesbian history in the UK. I said to Rebecca, I was like, am I just missing a bunch of stuff here? Because I feel like I should know, but I really can't find much stuff about butchness. And she was like, you're right. Your sense is right. It's just not there. And I think partly that's to do with the fact that, as I say, it's such a visual identity that it has become, how can I say this? I think when we've talked about butch femme community, we've focused too much on the bar scene. So it's been very restricted to what people were doing in that social space. And because butch and femme have been considered as ways of sort of organizing that early nascent kind of social scene, that space. So it was a way to sort of understand who could date who and who was buddies with who. Because of that, it's almost like the only thing we've looked at is butch through the view of the bar scene and through that kind of social aspect. Whereas that has meant we haven't reflected inward and thought about individualized butch experience that makes up that social space. So, my take on this is like the butch is very often seen, but very rarely heard in our historiography. Because the historians agree that butchness is absolutely central to the articulation of queer experience from around the mid-20th century onwards. Like, there's no dispute that butch and femme are absolutely pivotal to our experience, and yet there hasn't been like a really deep dig into what that means on the inside.
Right. And it's interesting because when we've talked a lot about this project, but one of the things that I was thinking about coming into this interview was that the word butch was one of the first terms that I ever heard that wasn't a heteronormative term.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
In early 1980s, mid 1980s American culture. Like it was just something that was thrown out there. I didn't know what it was, right?
Yeah.
And I think like my brother caught me up on it or something like that. But it was like one of those terms that I think is just one of those terms that, after the 1950s, by the 1980s, it's such a commonplace term to use, right? Butch and femme, kind of that dynamic.
People understand what that is.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, Sally Munn, another really important sort of lesbian critic, called butch the recognizable public form of lesbianism. Like, you know it when you see it, both mainstream cultures and queer people. So it's so visual that it almost doesn't need to be explained. I feel like that's what's happened there. And it's also like, oh, you know it when you see it. But when I've actually even sat down with people who talk and I've said, well, how do we actually describe butch? We're often at a loss. Like people are like, I don't know, like I know it when I see it. But how do we actually explain it? Like, I'll say to people, like, if I take off all the signifiers I've got on here, like I'm wearing a tie, like suit jacket, if I take all that off, I'm still butch. Right. So
right.
This is just the symbols of being butch.
Yeah.
So how am I butch all this stuff?
Yeah.
Right. So the material signs of it are not the thing, right? So how do we get at what the thing is? And that's actually been one of the hardest parts of the project, is actually to articulate what we mean by this, which seems like such an obvious, because like you said, right? Like it's a word that's in cultural circulation. It's also fair to say that it's gone through ebbs and flows in its popularity, which was having, ridden the wave of like this emergence of a new lesbian scene, falls out of favor pretty spectacularly in the 1970s and 1980s as a result of lesbian feminism, where butches were seen to be kind of upholding patriarchal norms, and victims of their own oppression. Like, they were kind of cause and consequence in that they allowed themselves to be sort of subjugated by these butch people who were co-opting into heteropatriarchy, whatever. So it really fell out of favor. And it was a real sort of split in the community. And I think that's fair to say, both sides of the Atlantic, that's true. It was kind of bound up in what then became known as the lesbian sex wars, which was where a lot of lesbian feminist politics argued against anything that in any way seemed to be aping or validating heteronormativity. And that included things like pornography, like certain types of sexual practices and things like that. So it then fell out of favor, but then kind of was resurrected again, like almost like Butch 2.0 in the 1990s and 2000s because of queer theory. So this new possibility of gender fluidity allows butch and femme to be kind of resurrected, and there's a whole kind of swathe of stuff that comes out, anthologies, academic interest, as well as kind of popular interest in kind of queer publishing. And then I think my argument is that we're seeing another renaissance now in the 2020s. If you go online, a lot of young queer people are very interested in new articulations of butch. Like, what does it mean to be butch and trans, for example? What does it mean to be non-binary and butch? What does it mean to be bisexual and butch? So I feel like, I don't know, young, what are we going to call them? We're going to go Gen Z, Gen whatever, are again reclaiming and making it work for our current context. So that's some of what this project is trying to do, is trying to draw that generational lineage from then to now.
I mean, that's really interesting. And one of the things that you've probably noticed, as well as we have on our side of the pond, is that a lot of styles from the 1990s are back. And they are on campus. And and I know, identity is not faddish, and I understand that. But at the same time, I think that nostalgia is a very powerful trope for people, right?
For sure.
So do you think people in these different phases are kind of looking back at a previous generation and kind of adopting their style or adopting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we even see that happening online. So there's some scholarship by Eleanor Medhurst that looks at people using online forums to talk about nostalgia for a time that they did not live in, right? And looking at queer symbolism from the early 20th century and saying, should we resurrect this? Like, violet tattoos or carabinas or monocles, like all this kind of stuff that people...
I mean, the monocle's great.
I was I was going to say, I'm super pro monocle, just for the record. Yeah, so.
Not highly practical, but there's definitely
no, they're worthless, but they're fun.
I was actually going to ask you if the 90s is back in the States too.
It is. Yeah.
What I see around here is it reminds me of being a teenager in Glasgow with my long trousers on because it was raining here the other day. And all the students had like sucked up half the rainwater up their trousers. Right. Remember that?
Yeah.
To the knees.
Yep. That's very popular in the States with the trousers that are literally dragging. And ripped. Right. But flares
absolutely.
are back. Chunky shoes are back.
Chunky shoes, the big chunky.
The big chunky shoes are back, and it's flannel. Flannel never went out,
not for butches anyway.
Right. but yeah, so like kind of the grungy thing is and it I kind of like it, but I also hate it because it means that the inevitable has happened.
Well, because now when you just dress the way that you always want to, you look like you're posing to try to be like a young person, right? And one thing that like as you're talking about this that I find interesting, so like in some ways, right, Ian has it easy, right, because like all the stuff he looks at has already happened, right? So like he didn't like he doesn't have to worry about like
did it happen, or did it happen in the way we think it happened?
but I mean, a lot of a lot of stuff that you're doing, right, is stuff that it continues to evolve, right, and like and so I wonder, like, how do you and maybe this is part of the problem, like how do you kind of cut off when you're going to stop looking at things? Like, how do you decide that this is like, okay, we're not doing, post 2024. Like, this is it. Like, we got to cut things off. Like, we can't talk about this stuff. Because I imagine too, like, I mean, as you continue to talk to people, as things are evolving, people's views of them are evolving. People's like, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really good things about oral history. In that, the minute you finish the interview, things keep on like they could reflect on it totally differently tomorrow, right? Like, it's always a work in process.
Right.
And I actually like that about it. There's a sort of I said this to my students just today, actually. There's a freedom in oral history that I really embrace, given that I'm kind of a control freak in other areas of my life. Oral history allows me like a safe space to play with like the unknown. I really actually love that.
Right.
I just never know what's going to happen when I go into an interview. Like, it could go any way. And there's no perfect interview because it will never be finished. We're always in process. Right. And I actually like that. But in terms of when to finish, I mean, I suppose one important thing to say, and it doesn't quite answer your question, but it answers a question that I would like to answer. So,
perfect.
A better question.
Good interviewing technique. Yes, good. Yeah. What I think you meant to ask. Yeah.
But what I think is interesting about doing this project now. So I wanted to do this project for years. Like, I was thinking about it when I was still writing my thesis. And, you're waiting for a job, and then you need to get funding. So I had some funding to do the travel I needed to do the interviews. Got sabbatical. So finally all the pieces were in place. But that ended up being really important because I am doing the project in this moment where trans identity is so much in the media. On the one hand, trans possibility is open in a way it never has been. But on the other hand, there's this huge, horrible, and it's even worse in the UK than it is in the US, anti-trans rhetoric. And so had we been doing the project we're sitting down with these people, like when I first started thinking about the project, I don't think it would have been as important. It would have been interesting to me, but I'm really interested in how interested other people are in this project, which I wouldn't inherently, I wouldn't think these people would inherently be interested in this project, right? Like, people are like, oh, really? That sounds so interesting. And I think if I'd done it 10 years ago, they'd be like, oh, okay, right? It just has more resonance for people now.
Oh, I'm just thinking in terms of marketing, right? So if you publish a book that has a title like that says something like Butch, a cultural history, right? It's going to attract attention.
Right. In a way that did not.
I'd read it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It might not be the attention you want.
Yeah. Right. That's also true. Yeah. Like, you do not want that. Like, I'm some kind of Twitter warrior, any of these kind of things. I'm just not interested in that. But there is a mainstream interest which you feel like you want to contribute to. Because I also think something important about this work now is that it can engage in this horrendous discourse in a useful way. Because my point is that we can understand butchness as part of an abiding history of female masculinity or masculine of center, queer female embodiedness, right? And maybe if people who are not kind of in this world will not be aware of this, but part of that anti-trans rhetoric, butch bodies have kind of been weaponized in this discourse, because some anti-trans advocates are saying, oh, there's not going to be any butches anymore because they're all going to be made or brainwashed or whatever to become trans men.
I've seen some of this on Twitter.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is part of the anti-trans lobby or agenda, whatever you want to call it, which is saying, oh, look what's happening. We're losing all the butches. And butches are saying, actually, I think, we're fine. And my research has definitely proven that. I'm also not going to argue for butch as something which is going to be here forever. Maybe it won't be, because what we're actually looking at is how people are taking different ways of embodying masculinity in an AFAB body, which works with the time that you live in. Like
right.
It has a purpose and a functionality within our own context. So I'm hoping that the project can intervene in that way, which is to say, like, seriously, this is coming from butchers themselves. They're not anxious about this.
Right.
Or actually, they're seeing themselves as part of a wider trajectory, a wider history or lineage of AFAB masculinity. And that's okay. Right. So trans, as I said, I've interviewed people who are trans, who still identify as butch. I've interviewed people who are trans and feel that they are going to now leave butch behind because that's for somebody else. So just bringing some nuance to the discussion, which I know is not very popular.
Nuance is definitely not popular.
Yeah.
It's not going to be butch, hold on, and nuanced.
Right.
Yeah. It's strange. There's been a lot of, Ian would know this because he hasn't been in the States, but there's been a fair number of political ads in the United States lately, and very little nuance. It's been surprising.
Yeah, and some of those ads are about gender too. So
they absolutely are.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it's one of these things that I think, I'm really excited about the book. I'm really excited for you to write it. I'm really excited to see what it looks like out the other side. I am hoping that things cool down just enough that you won't just get the knee jerk.
This is what you're worried about. And this is very important, thinking about this as a result of oral history interviews. These are real people who I interviewed and whose lives are going to be woven through this book. There is no book without these people. Right. And it worries me to put that out there. Also, to archive the interviews worries me in a way that it didn't 5 years ago.
Right.
It used to just be sort of unequivocally good to archive queer voices. Right? That is actually, I'm not sure I can say that now, because I'm worried what kind of position I might be putting people in by having their voice publicly accessible. And I don't want people to become exposed to that kind of negativity. I don't want their stories and experiences to be maligned. That does worry me. And I think that all historians should be thinking about the ethical components of what we do. But obviously, oral historians have often been like the ethicists of any history department, because we're working with real people and there's very real consequences to what we put out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to do IRB clearance or anything like that, and because all of my subjects are dead. Sure. And we still for my research, I do think ethically about going through medical records and things like that. Am I outing somebody for PTSD or for shell shock or something like that? How do I be sensitive to that person with those kinds of things? Your research, these people are all still alive.
Yeah. It feels a lot of responsibility sometimes. And in a way, it does, it's one of those things that stops you from putting pen to paper, right? Yeah. Because you're like, oh my God, what if they read this and absolutely hate the way I've interpreted? But so there's the head and heart, because it's my job to bring my skills as a historian to bear on this testimony. Otherwise, what on earth is the point of doing this? But there's also the fact that I sat with these people in their homes. They welcomed me in, they fed me, looked after me. And now I have to make something of what they said, and they may not like what I choose to say about what they said. And that really weighs heavy, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, in ways I'm sure it does in physics too. Right?
It makes me really glad I basically just mix salts together in different amounts.
I'm hurt to blow something up.
I can, but if I can, my research has gone really poorly because it really is mostly just water and salt. So if it blows up, something really bad has happened. So, I'm not saying it's never happened. I'm just saying that it's not a good day in the lab.
So should we move on to the question?
Absolutely.
So what brings you joy?
Oh, such a good question. So I understand that there's no F-bombs, right?
Well, you can. We just.
Oh, no, we can't. You can. We'll just bleep it out. It's fine. Yeah.
So I wondered, are you bleeping? Would you bleep if I was to say that sitting here with you brings me joy?
Oh.
Is that too Hallmark?
I don't know. Yeah, that's.
I don't think so.
I don't know. It's tough. It's the problem is then I have to be around Ian for the rest of the time after you've said this, and then he can say, "Remember when that guest said that the greatest thing was being with me?"
That's true. Well, you can. That is pretty great. Like, there's a few.
But think about this, because we've been friends for 16 years,
right?
A 16-year interdisciplinary friendship for people who, on paper, could not be more different. That's a pretty amazing thing, Karen. It's a testament to both of our affability, I think.
Yeah.
Social skills.
Yeah.
That's our.
That's right.
See, I thought you were going to point out the fact that, like, I've only known you for a couple of years, and I'm thinking that's about time for us to cut this off. So,
but I mean, what I did say to my colleagues when I was advertising Ian's talk was, my very good friend of many years, Dr. Ian Isherwood, what we lack in disciplinary overlap, we make up for in sartorial sensibilities.
That's good. I love that.
But to your question of what else brings me joy, I think this is a really good question, and I have a couple of things I want to say. One is that being outside almost always brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah.
And I run. I do endurance running very slowly, which is why I need to be an endurance runner because it takes so long. But they talk about the runner's high. I mean, that is really a thing. Like running outside, not on the road, like on a bypass or something. No, but like running outside where I live in Norfolk. On a trail where there's like nothing but me, fields, trees, whatever. Like that's pretty great. And that is a moment, like there's a transcendent moment of joy that can be found in doing that. Like just, it can be fleeting, but there is such a thing. We live very rurally, and so we have a lot of opportunity to kind of be in nature, which I just love doing. I miss the hills of Scotland a lot because where we live in Norfolk is pretty flat. It's kind of rolling.
That's good for running, though.
Very good for running. Yeah, probably wouldn't
right
in Scotland, but but I do miss the hills. But like simple pleasures, like the sublime of nature, I think brings me a lot of joy. Like I was in our garden, and there was a bee on a verbena in our garden, and my partner came out and she was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just looking at this bee." And she was like, "Okay, whatever." So she went back inside and she came out like 5 minutes later. She's like, "Are you still looking at that bee?" I've been looking at this bee. Doing some really interesting stuff.
Doing bee stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, look at him go.
It's the most important thing that's going on right now.
Like I can get very in my own head. And so the moments when you can just not be doing that and just be literally like, I am now going to give myself over to just watching this pretty amazing thing happening for like 5 minutes. Like that's a pretty great thing. And getting to the point in my life where I can do that without, I mean, sooner or later, the voice is going to kick in. That's like, oh my God, like, you haven't done this and that and the other. But actually finding some way to do that and embrace that has for me been very important, to acknowledge that is worth doing.
Yeah.
And I, since we're talking about queer stuff, I also wanted to say that there's a very particular concept of queer joy, which does the rounds a lot in sort of queer community, especially online. You'll see that concept mobilized quite a lot. And I guess what it's getting at is a type of joyfulness which comes from claiming a self and a community and identity that feels very authentic to you, and kind of really joyfully embracing that, which I think more and more people have found online. It's come into its own, I think, because people are making those connections online and creating those online spaces. So I think that queer joy means something very particular, and it's about just really embracing and in a very intentional way that self, right? So I think queer joy is also. I have a friend who's a floor above us in the English department called Prue Bussey-Chamberlain, and we have a lot of strong overlap in what we teach on. Except Prue's stuff is often very depressing, and we have an ongoing joke about this. I'm like, oh, really? Again with the trauma. Which is not to say that queer history and queer lit doesn't have a lot of trauma in it. It does. I'm just like, Prue, I'm not here for that. I want to be joyful.
Right.
I do that with my students too. I think they come in taking a class on, queer British history, thinking it's going to be an absolute bummer. But then you're like, no, actually, we're finding moments of queer joy here, in spite of what would be the contrary of how difficult that must have been to live a queer life at any point in this period. I want students to see that it's much more than that. Like, people have lived against the grain, and in spite of everything that would appear to stop them from doing so, people have found that queer joy. And so I really want to bring that to my teaching. Actually, I want students to see that and embrace that as a concept.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I mean, because I'm thinking about how people go into my classes, and I bet they go into my classes thinking it's going to be absolutely miserable because it's about war,
Right?
And because I'm teaching. But they're going into it and they're like, war, so it's just going to be absolutely terrible. And it's funny because whenever I show them letters of people who are doing something funny or are really grateful that they got to drink some beer and got some cigarettes in the mail, and or go and find companionship, right? When you show those kind of letters, people realize that it's not all trauma and being terrible.
There's something amazing about that in people's resilience to find joy. Joy is a strategy of resilience, which I think is why it has been so important for queer communities to embrace the concept of queer joy. It is a point of resilience. It is a point of fighting back and refusing to be miserable all the time. So I think actually it's a very political thing to find joy in the everyday, in the kind of mundane to the sublime. This is a mode of living, which I think we can be very, I agree with you that when we think about teaching some of the big topics of history, it's not the first thing we go to. It's not the emotion that we jump to, right? But I think we miss a huge amount of what it is actually to understand human experience by doing that.
Yeah, I think that's why the history of emotions has become such an interesting field right now. And it's always been around, but it's now kind of theorized.
Right.
And people are acknowledging that. Yeah. But why don't we take a little break?
Yep, sounds good. And then we'll come back.
All right. Welcome back to the Ivory Attic. I'm Ian Isherwood.
And I'm Kurt Andreessen.
And we are here with Dr. Amy Murphy. So we're moving on into our next segment, which is our quiz.
Oh, boy.
Ready? I
am ready. I mean, having listened to some of these episodes, I really have no idea what to expect. There is a wide gamut of things that could happen now.
So, yes, the quiz is...
Because I feel like the fact that he knows you so well is actually a bad thing in this case.
Yeah, I know. I didn't think that.
Yeah, well, so I went on Dean Chat. I consulted Dean Chat, and I said, come up with a funny quiz for a queer historian, and that did not go well. So we are not using that. And so then I thought maybe I didn't ask the question right. So I asked, right. So I asked for a gender historian. And that went even worse.
No way, really?
Yes. So that is not a safe question for Dean Chat.
So I won't have Dean Chat write my exam paper?
No.
Apparently not.
I think the issue was the word funny. Because
funny is not helping. Yeah.
It's not really funny.
Right. I've heard that from previous episodes.
Right. We had one good quiz, and then it went off.
Dude, I was gonna say it lulled us in. Yeah.
Okay, so I consulted the true quiz master, who is Sam Greg Isherwood, for Sam's opinion as to what I should ask you. And Sam said we should do something rapid fire.
Oh my God, that seems really hard,
Whoa.
Sam.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, Sam also said that.
Now, wait, is this rapid fire on both sides? Like, is it going to be timed?
Then Sam said you also need to validate each one of your answers with a verbal footnote because you're an oral historian. And I said that's too much. We can't.
Didn't say.
She did.
It's such a nice person.
She is nice, but this brought out something. It's brought out her competitive side. All right. So, city or country?
City.
Oh, wasn't expecting that.
No, I wasn't expecting that. It just came out.
It just came out. Yeah, I think so. City.
That's not the answer.
All right, Amy, you've already gotten one wrong. Self-admitted, incorrect. Yes.
I mean, what is true anyway?
North or south?
North.
Waistcoats or Fair Isle?
Waistcoats.
Oh. Doc Martens or Brogues?
Brogues.
Thank you.
Jammy Dodger or Empire Biscuit?
Empire Biscuit.
That's
100 times over. I am so strong on that, I can't even tell you.
Oh, wow. Cheese and pickle or cheese and onion?
Cheese and onion.
Prawn cocktail or sweet Thai chili?
Oh, prawn cocktail every single time.
A Hawaiian pizza or some kind of strange vegetarian pizza?
Some kind of strange hipster lesbian pizza.
Okay.
With the artichoke.
Love that.
Artichokes are great on pizza.
Oh, they are.
Absolutely.
Anchovies or kippers?
Well, now you're asking me to make a class-based statement.
Yeah, it is.
As someone from from working class roots who is solidly middle class, that's a tough question for me to answer. Anchovies.
Anchovies.
Yeah.
Oh.
See?
Is that how you thought it would go?
I just feel like now I'm not from the block anymore, am I? Like, you can't,
right.
I've just gone full tilt.
Yeah.
Middle class now, right?
Yeah, that's too bad. Well, you can still eat a kipper now and again, right?
Right.
Oat cake or water biscuit?
Oh, oat cake.
Oat cake. Good. I'm
Scottish.
Yeah, you're Scottish. Yorkshire tea or any other tea?
Now that is context specific, because here we are in the southeast of England where the water is very hard, and I also now live in Norfolk where the water is even harder.
Okay.
In Scotland, it's very soft, so you would not be wanting to put a Yorkshire tea bag anywhere near Scottish water. You would have a tarry mess. But if I used my Scottish tea bags in Norfolk, I would just have water. So Yorkshire tea bags in Norfolk.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's very specific.
Okay. There we go.
Tweed or linen?
Tweed or linen?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today does not represent my true feelings because it's tweed.
Again, Scotland. Scotland's coming out.
Yeah, exactly.
I very rarely get my tweed out in Norfolk. It's too warm.
Yeah. Glasgow or Edinburgh?
Oh, come on. Glasgow.
and that's the end. You pass.
Well done. You only got the first one wrong. Then once you got into it, you were really.
But that is interesting, though. Why did I say that?
Why did you just think Yeah. I wasn't expecting it either.
Rorschach kind of test. Yeah. No, the answer to that is country.
Or is it?
Or is it?
Oh my God! That's a question for life now.
I was going to say, we're going to find you. You're going to be in a completely new place. You're going to a condo.
Yeah, that's not the answer to that question. I think I was just thinking about my research. That takes place mostly in cities.
All right, Kurt. What's our next segment?
Hey, where are we moving?
Moving into what's your style?
Oh yeah, excited about this.
So, what is your style?
Oh my God, this question is so huge.
Especially for what you do.
I was going to say, especially for the exact thing you study, yes.
Like Kurt and I literally saw middle-aged professors on TV in the 1980s dressed the way that we dress, and we said, okay, that's how we're supposed to look.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
It's a strategy.
It is.
It's worked so far. We both have our jobs. So.
Right. But like I was saying before, if you take off all the tweed, are you still how do you know you're still a professor under all that?
Well, actually, when you asked, when you were talking about that earlier, it did make me, I got like pangs of insecurity because I don't know, like, I think the fact that I trip a lot and I'm kind of bumbling and I think that might lock me into academic.
Yeah, okay.
But at the same time, I don't think I'm necessarily thoughtful enough in a lot of ways to be an academic. So if you had like the bumbly kind of side with like a Bertie Wooster soul is kind of
I'd have to say
how I would feel without the tweed. So
right.
I've seen Ian wear a leather jacket. It looks like someone grabbed Bertie Wooster and threw a leather jacket on him. So
this guy said to me, he goes, I'm walking down the street. He goes, "Whoa, is that the font?" Anyway, sorry. What's your style?
My style. Okay, so I mean, I should have said before, my reason for wanting to study butchness is because I am butch myself and very strongly self-identify. And so my style has evolved to embrace that over the years. I guess my style is very overtly masculine. I've been misgendered at least twice today already by students, one of whom sat through a whole lecture with me for an hour.
Oh, really?
Called me sir at the end. Which, I enjoy these moments. She came up to me in the hall last week and was like, "Excuse me," it was looking for a room. "Excuse me, sir. Sorry." Like, yeah, it's okay. It's in the basement. They do that whole thing, like, because it's the worst thing you can do is to call a woman a man, right? Yeah. Like that's total failure of womanness is to be masculine, right? So, I mean, this is one of the things that interests me about how to like butch pride is also very interesting, and butch joy is very interesting to me because you have to work over and across a lot of social and cultural conditioning to then embrace what you are and not see that as a shameful thing, right? So there's a lot in that. Anyway, so I guess my aesthetic it shares a commonality with yours, right, Ian? I always would like to, I guess I'm in competition with myself, but also I like to look better than a lot of my male colleagues.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Oh yeah, I like that.
and I'm guessing you do.
I was gonna say, from what I can see from the screen, like you're making it happen today.
Thank you. I mean, there's a kind of a vintageness to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I've got the horn rim glasses on. I like vintage tie. I have like a wool tie or a knitted tie. So what you don't want to do is that whole thing where quite a lot of butches or masculine center queer women do that thing where they kind of look like they're wearing their dad's suit and like this little thing, like a boxy jacket. You have to move away from that. So I have embraced the kind of vintage because that works. I'm not particularly big. I'm like 5'6". I'm like a UK size 10. I don't know what that is like in the States, but like a 6 or something. So I'm not a big person. So putting on like a man's jacket is not that straightforward. Like it looks silly. So if I look silly, it's because I've chosen to look silly, not because stuff doesn't look good on me, right? So, but there's something in that. Like there's something about deliberately performing a slight over the topness, right? So my style is exaggerated. I go into the class like this, I know that my students think it's at least a little bit silly, like funny. So I think over the years, my style is really go for whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Don't
I like that,
look stupid by accident. Like look stupid because you wanted to.
I was gonna say there's obviously a reason we all get along. Yes, this makes a ton of sense now. Yeah.
But it links to your clown episode.
Yeah.
Because it's like I'm doing this understanding that there is something vaguely ridiculous about me, as there is about all of us, and I'm kind of open to that. It's like the whole bully thing. You can't bully me if I accept what I am.
Right.
Like, or you like lesbian or you're a man or whatever. Yes, sure, whatever. Like that's fine by me. I know I can see myself. And I think that takes a bit of power. So I like to kind of play that up a bit with students. I like that. Apparently I have heard that there have been WhatsApp discussions about my ties. I have heard this to be true amongst the student body over the years.
This is great.
This tie is one of my dad's. And I think I also try to embody that like over the topness everywhere. So as I said before, I'm a runner. So running requires you to look pretty stupid, like trail running, especially like with the high compression socks and everything. I mean, my partner thinks I look absolutely ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, and I want to. So like I've got the hat with like the brim, like the peak flipped up.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I've got like, and at one point I would never have worn like leggings or like tight shorts or any of that kind of stuff because I wasn't comfortable enough with my body to do that, I think. And as you get older, you're just like,
you don't care anymore.
I don't care about
it.
Actually, I'm going to wear this. I also, a couple of years ago, had a preventative mastectomy because I have a history of breast cancer in my family. And for a while, I was kind of figuring out how to really explain this to people, because for a lot of people, if they have that procedure done, that would be like a loss for them. Like it's such a part of their like identity, their femaleness. But for me, I started calling it a gender-assisted mastectomy because it felt like as a butch, actually, it kind of brought my body into alignment. So it actually
interesting.
An interesting dual purpose. Like I can't call it top surgery because it wasn't that. I'm not trans. And I went for medical reasons. But my relationship with my body and its masculinity, actually, I was able to lean into that. Mm-hmm. And there are some benefits because now my tie just like hangs straight down.
Goes straight down, yeah.
It's like this poking out thing, like sticking over the top, and then it's like the rest of the tie is like hanging down, like in midair.
Yeah.
Don't have that problem anymore. So, that was a real positive.
Jacket cuts too, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very hard to find a waistcoat to fit you, unless it's a woman's waistcoat, which then has the very overly feminized kind of cuts.
Yeah.
They're kind of cut like corsets.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
But also, I think realizing what works for you is just super important, right? Like finding your style and just embracing it and being like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
And I want to do it. Like, so I'm going to do it now. So yeah, extra is my style.
Yeah. Well, I think that's amazing. So on that note, I bought you both a present. I was just in London. So I got you both a present, and Amy gets to pick which one Amy wants.
Oh, okay.
I went to Cordings, which is a gentleman's shop in Piccadilly, and I got each one of you a matching handkerchief of flying game birds.
Whoa!
One in red, and then there's one in blue. And these are great. You can use it. You can wear them in the pocket. You can use it as an actual handkerchief. You can also do it as a bandana or a neckerchief. So. How I tend to do them.
Just don't do all of those at the same time. Yeah.
So, and the good thing is that I have one of these too, so we can all be.
Excellent!
So whatever color you want.
Let me see. I feel like blue is going to go with more of my stuff.
All right, Kurt, you get the bold red.
All right.
Nice.
Which I think you want it.
Yeah.
And you get to keep the Cordings bag.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
There you go.
Awesome.
Pretty exciting. All right.
So we all can match with our.
That's so cool.
That's perfect.
With our handkerchief.
Perfect. I love it.
See, this is why
This is why we're friends.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it, though.
It's a big part of it.
All right, do you want to take another break?
Yeah, let's do it. And then I think we've really worked hard, and you need to make sure you have at least one before you go and do your talk. So.
Give a talk. That's right. Welcome back to the Ivory Attic. We're here with Dr. Amy Tooth Murphy, and we're here for our what's our segment, Kurt?
I'm not allowed to say it. Go for it.
It's Cocktail Corner with Kurt.
Thank you very much.
This one's a little bit complicated for us, isn't it?
This one is complicated. Well, so we had to make something that you all could do on your own. And we also had to make something that required very few ingredients because you told me you had access to almost nothing. But I think it actually lined up, I think, with exactly what Amy sent to me. I think, sorry, I'm trying to bring up, here we go. The idea for the cocktail was something butch, but with a knowing campiness, I think was the thing. And so I ended up being inspired actually by. Can we talk a little bit about what I was inspired by, Ian?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so you have a wonderful story about how a favorite drink that your mom used to drink. What was that one?
Yeah, so the first time I ever tasted alcohol was in the 1980s, and I was a wee boy. I was probably about 6 years old or so. And my mother was rather fond of this diet soda that we had in the States that was called Tab, Tab, Tab. And I don't think they make it anymore. But she was quite fond of it. And one day I picked up her Tab can and I went to take a sip of it. And I immediately just spit it out all over her because it tasted like my mouth was on fire. And that was because unbeknownst to me, my mother used to suck down a bit of the Tab can and then top it off with vodka. So I got a mouthful of Stoli, and that was one of her favorite drinks in the 1980s. And you know what, Kurt? She was ahead of her time.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. Yeah, no, if you were making that today, it would sell like hotcakes.
Absolutely. And what is one of your favorite things about the UK?
One of my favorite things, so this was also inspired, but one of my favorite things about the UK is the wonderful canned cocktails that exist in the UK. Like the idea that I can grab myself a Pimm's cup, I can grab myself a gin and tonic, and just straight from the grocery store, crack it open within seconds. I'm sucking down a canned cocktail. It's amazing. We don't, and we have nowhere near that type of thing here in the States, where you can just go into a nice grocery store, get yourself a nice G&T.
And they're always at the train station.
Yeah.
So of course,
you can really have your own bar service on the train.
Yeah,
and I will.
And what better way to do that? What better way to spend a time on a train, right? What else are you going to do?
Yeah, because you're like returning emails or something. It's
absolutely,
nice,
exactly.
Really nice I was gin and tonic.
I was inspired by this, and so and also there was a bit of a nod to to, of course, your Amy, your Scottish background, and that the plan is not. I'm going to explain. We're going to do a little different than normal because actually I have to tell you how you're going to make this cocktail. But what we're going to do is we're going to crack open a seltzer, and you're going to have to drink at least 2 ounces of that seltzer so that you can then add 2 ounces of scotch back up to it, and that's going to be our cocktail. Now, I have some really bad news, Amy, which is that Ian sent me an image yesterday. So when I constructed this, I imagined that we would use a nice neutral flavored seltzer.
Right.
And then Ian sent me this picture that showed apparently in whatever store he was in the UK had nothing but fruity flavored seltzers. So
it was Waitrose.
Yeah, and so Ian, what do you got? What do you got for us seltzer wise here?
A Dash blackcurrant sparkling water, 0 calories, and it has a beautiful purple hue to it.
All right, blackcurrant. Well, to match you, because I felt of it. So I do have a regular seltzer, but I thought I wouldn't be keeping in the spirit of it if I wasn't drinking almost the same cocktail as you all. And so I found we have a blackberry bubbly that I found, which I think is as close to a blackcurrant as I can get in the States, as far as far as
some cassis now, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, so let's start out. We're gonna. You already cracked yours open.
We did.
We did.
Okay. All right, there you heard that one. All right, and get 2 ounces out of there.
We're pausing it to watch Kurt drink.
Oh, you already got the 2 ounces out? Oh man,
yeah, we've already made the drink.
I'm sitting there staring at you guys. You're just staring at me like I'm like a crazy. I was like, oh, okay.
No, it's better this way.
Wonderful. All right. And then for what do you have as far as single malt goes?
So I picked Shackleton because it had a very masculine name.
Yeah, it does.
No, I like that. That's perfect. That's perfect.
I agree.
All right. And I got some Tamnavulin.
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm.
I was really concerned actually because I have this really nice bottle of Doublewood that I really didn't want to pour into a seltzer. So
no, but I kind of wish you had to do that.
Yeah,
that's a lot better.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't because I was going to share with you. So, all right, so go ahead and let's go ahead and add this. All right. Here we go. Let's see. Can you do it on? Oh, you already did this. You already did it?
Yeah.
You got to do it on screen. Oh, geez, it's going all over the place.
It's got
that might be more than 2 ounces.
It looks like it.
Yeah. Ah, well,
it's the end of the bottle. It's the end of the bottle. So okay, all right. All right. And I thought it's unoriginal, but I thought we just named this the Butch, which has a nice ring to it. Like,
I mean, it looks super Butch, doesn't it? Like the can.
No, that was part of the idea, right? Cheers.
What do we have going on here? Let's see.
It's not as terrible as I thought it would be, to be honest. But
it's not.
It's not great, but it's not terrible.
It has an air of my parents have gone out and I've raided their cabinet.
yes, absolutely. All right.
That is absolutely the taste. The taste is teenage basement.
Exactly. Hey, we should. This stuff tastes terrible. Is there anything we can mix it with? Yeah, I don't know. I got some black currant seltzer. Can we just throw that together? I don't know.
But Kurt, you actually had a theoretical reason for making this, right?
There was a theoretical reason. Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole idea, right, is that like part of what I was thinking about was that like there's this whole thing about like how like generally like women are supposed to be drinking seltzer and everything should be 0 calorie and like you shouldn't and God forbid you actually drink and definitely drink scotch, like why would you like, and so I love the idea of like okay, well it's still, look, I've got the can,
right,
it's it looks like I'm being proper cocktail. Yeah, exactly that was kind of my thought.
Yeah, he was trying to overthink it.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. There has been, interestingly, a move to try and get more women. Like you can see they're marketing whiskey towards women in young women.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Only certain brands, but there is a marketing push, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, cool. All right.
Really?
Yeah, marketing really strongly towards young people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, stranger.
Yeah. This isn't as terrible as I thought it was going to be because
I thought it was going to be
because I sent Kurt a picture of lime or black currant, and he goes, "Lime's probably smoother, but black currant is funnier."
It's funnier, yeah.
No, exactly. When you had mentioned the campiness, I thought like it's definitely campy.
Yeah. No,
it's got to be black currant
because the lime is too much like trying to act up to actually a cocktail.
Right. It's almost something. Yeah, exactly.
The black currant is literally you're in the basement and you're.
It's also, I've been reading a lot of Agatha Christie. I've been reading a lot of Poirot lately.
Oh, yeah.
And he loves to sit and drink a sirop de cassis.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
Is anybody that embodies a knowing campiness, it's Hercule Poirot.
It's absolutely
not a Butchin for sure, but like the campiness. I feel like
this is there.
This is in keeping with what I've been thinking about lately.
I love it. That's perfect.
Now, Kurt, you had a second drink, a take-home drink, right?
Yeah. So this is because we felt bad about the fact that we hadn't given you a real cocktail. So I'm gonna give you a cocktail to make when you get home, which is also along kind of a similar lines. And what it is, it's the name of it is Think Pink. All right. It's a variation on a pink gin. All right. And so a normal pink gin is it was considered kind of like in the 20s like a girl's drink. It is literally just cold gin with a couple of dashes of bitters put in it. It is one of the strongest, most difficult drinks to drink that exists. And so again, I thought it was perfect with the theme. What we're going to do with it though is we're going to take that gin, we're going to put, normally you do a couple of dashes of bitters. We're going to put 8 dashes of bitters in it. So it's really, really as far as it can possibly go. And the other thing I find hilarious about Yeah, and it has to be Angostura bitters. So this is what traditionally is. And the other thing I find hilarious about this is that Angostura bitters are orange. It's not a pink drink. It's absolutely going to be an orange drink, which is why the name is Pink Pink.
Which is going to look like Iron Brew. Which is
it looks like Iron Brew. Right. Yeah, it will look
good.
Just if you're a kid, don't confuse it.
Yeah, no, do not confuse it. Yeah,
yeah. And garnish with a lemon.
No garnish. There's nothing. There's no. Garnish. I don't want to take it. I do not want anything taken away from this. Listen, no one should be drinking the drink. You have to shake it up really hard. It should get really, really cold, and you have to drink as quickly as possible because as soon as it gets just a touch over absolute freezing cold, it's going to be undrinkable.
All right.
Well, Kurt, you've done it again. Something.
Yeah. I know the wonderful powers that exist. I know it's a strange gift. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna get that drink, and I will send you a picture of it.
Perfect.
I love it. Actually,
you're talking like a rock glass here.
No, so I want this straight up. I want this straight up in a coupe. Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So you're gonna. That's hence why you have to drink it quickly. Please make sure that coupe is chilled ahead of time because again, otherwise, you're really. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be really bad. Yeah. All right. Well, I think on that note.
On that note, thank you so much, Amy Murphy.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been a real pleasure.
This is wonderful.
All right, Kurt. So people can reach us how?
Let's see. Mail at theivoryattic.com.
Ivory Attic posts on XH. What was I saying?
Okay.
Sorry, the black current's getting to me.
That talk's going to go great. All right. All right, take us out.
All right. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us as we, what do I normally say?
Rummage.
Yes. Thank you, colleagues, as we've rummaged through the Ivory Attic. Join us next time.
You are.
And
I'm Kurt Andreessen.